Good evening, everybody, and thank you for coming to New Beacon this evening. We're very excited to be holding this event. As you probably all know, New Beacon is 55 years old this year, and our sibling organisation, the George Padmore Institute, is 30 years old. So this is a really, really special year for the shop and the Institute and our team. And I just want to do a name check on our team. Michael, unfortunately, can't be here this evening, and neither can Janice, but we've got Nicole here, who's one of our team members, and Otamia, and Misha's over there too, who is a La Rose, a member of the La Rose family. And quite a few of you who are contributing tonight are part of the kind of extended New Beacon family, and we're really happy to have you here this evening. John La Rose made connections with all sorts of people from different countries across his political and cultural passions, really, and his commitment to justice, social justice, across everywhere that had been colonized, basically. And the books really reflect that in terms of Africa, the Caribbean, and Asia. So we're really happy to be hosting this event. And it was very exciting when Natalia, who is here this evening from the Serpentine, first came into the shop when Nicole and I were working on a busy day, and introduced herself and told us about this whole project with Samaya Valley, who I'm also really pleased is here this evening. Really, really exciting. And the idea of doing the pavilion, creating the pavilion, with inspiration about London's black communities was something that really resonated with us, and we were so excited. Nicole and I were like, yes, we definitely want to do this. And when Michael and Janice heard about it, of course, they were delighted too. And particularly so because of the different locations that Samaya has drawn inspiration from in terms of the pavilion. And when I went to visit, I really liked the idea that it was something that people were enjoying. They weren't just looking at as a work of art. They were actually, kids were playing on it, people were drinking, they were chatting, they were climbing through it. And of course, we are delighted that we have a piece of it here, which makes a very stylish bookcase and seat, although I don't think we've ever sat on it. No. But it's really, we did take a photo. We did take a photo. So we're really excited that that's part of this whole project, and connecting London's communities through the bookshop, but also other places, including the Tabernacle, which many of us also have a connection with. So this evening we've got some wonderful writers joining us and sharing extracts from various books that they've either written, or they're sharing poems from other people as well as their own work. And I'm going to give a brief introduction to each person, and then they will introduce the piece of work that they are going to share with us this evening. But just really be conscious, I think, this evening that this is not just something about art in terms of something separate to politics, but art and politics and activism is at the heart of New Beacon, and we feel very conscious that that tradition has to be carried on, and there's a real commitment to that. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce Margaret Busby first. A very experienced editor and somebody who's really supported the work of other writers. And she's going to be reading an extract from the anthology of New Daughters of Africa. Thank you, Margaret.
Here we go. I'm delighted to be here, and I've had connections with New Beacon and John La Rose and the La Rose family going back to the 60s. I started publishing in 1967. But I'm going to read something from an anthology that I edited that came out in 2019. I had done a previous anthology in 1992 called Daughters of Africa. It was meant to showcase writings by women of African descent from the ancient Egyptian to the present day. And in 2019, a volume called New Daughters of Africa came out, which showcased another 200 plus women of African descent, just to show that there's that creativity that is often overlooked. And New Daughters of Africa contains writings of all sorts of genres, from women of African descent going back to the 1790s, right up to those born in the 1990s. So I'm going to read something from the piece that was contributed by Andrea Levy before she sadly died in 2019. And this is a piece, an extract from her 2004 novel, Small Island. And I'm not going to try the Jamaican accent, but this is a piece that starts like this. Let me ask you to imagine this. Living far from you is a beloved relation whom you have never met. Yet this relation is so dear a kin, she is known as mother. Your own mummy talks of mother all the time. Oh, mother is a beautiful woman, refined, mannerly, and cultured. Your daddy tells you, mother thinks you are her children. Like the Lord above, she takes care of you from afar. Her photographs are cherished, pinned in your own family album to be admired over and over. Your finest, your best, everything you have that is worthy is sent to mother as gifts. And on her birthday, you sing song and party. Then one day you hear mother calling. She is troubled. She needs your help. Leave home. Leave familiar. Leave love. Travel seas with waves that swell about you as substantial as concrete buildings. Shiver, tire, hunger. For no sacrifice is too much to see you at mother's needy side. This surely is adventure. After all you have heard, can you imagine? Can you believe? Soon you will see mother? The filthy tramp that eventually greets you is she. Can this be that fabled relation you heard so much of? This twisted, crooked, weary woman? This stinking, cantankerous hag? She offers you no comfort after your journey, no smile, no welcome. Yet she looks down at you through lordly eyes and says, who the bloody hell are you? You know I'm talking of England. You know I'm speaking of the mother country. But Britain was at war, you might want to tell me. Of course she would not be at her best. But for me, I had just one question. Let me ask the mother country just this one simple question. How come England did not know me? Now see this. An English soldier, Tommy Atkins, skin as pale as soap, hair slicked with oil and shinier than his boots. See him sitting in a pub, sipping a glass of warming rum and rolling a cigarette from a tin. Ask him, Tommy, tell me now, where is Jamaica? And hear him reply, well, dunno, Africa innit? And here is Lady Havelock, living in her big house with her ancestors' pictures crowding the walls. Ask her to tell you about the people of Jamaica. To see that small boy standing tall in a classroom where sunlight draws lines across the room, speaking of England, of canals, of Parliament, and the greatest laws ever passed. Or might she, with some authority from a book she'd read, tell you of savages, jungles, and swinging through trees? It was inconceivable that we Jamaicans, we West Indians, we members of the British Empire would not fly to the mother country's defence when there was threat. But tell me, if Jamaica was in trouble, is there any major, any general, any sergeant who would have been able to find that dear island? Give me a map. Let me see if Tommy Atkins or Lady Havelock can point to Jamaica. Let us watch them turning the page around, screwing up their eyes to look, turning it over to see if perhaps the region was lost on the back, but before shrugging defeat. But give me that map, blindfold me, spin me round 3 times, and I, dizzy and dazed, would still place my finger squarely on the mother country. By Andrea Levy.
Say very quickly to everyone that as we say in Trinidad, she's not easy, you know. Yesterday she accepted a Lifetime Achievement Award from the London Book Club. So we're very honoured to have her.
Thank you. Thanks, Nicole.
And she had several bookings possibly tonight, but she chose New Beacon. She knows New Beacon.
She chose us.
So thank you again. Next, we're going to invite Derek Owusu. It's very bright, so I can't see where you are, Derek, but he's a writer. Hi. He's a writer who, when the book Safe came out about 2 years ago, I believe, we did an event, Nicole and I. There was lots of interest hearing these voices from men and identity and all sorts of growing up and all sorts of trauma and all sorts of things followed in the discussion. Really interesting theme. So I'd like to invite him up. He's going to be reading a bit from That Reminds Me. Thanks, Derek.
Yes, hello, I'm Derek Owusu, and I am a writer and or poet. I'm going to be reading an extract from my first novel in verse, That Reminds Me, which was published in 2019 by Murky Books. And the extract I'm going to read is kind of just kind of giving different aspects of the London that I grew up knowing. The cut above my brother's eye is still healing the day he hears the news through his Xbox headset. So he's dead, I ask. Yeah, stabbed. My brother is lying on the mattress in my mum's room playing FIFA online, gloating over a goal as if his past friendship still remained as his current rivalry, his on-site relationship. I don't believe him. P, how do you feel about that? You two used to be friends. I can't pause online games, bro. Talk to me later. But what goes around comes around, innit? Oh my days, man, that should have been a goal. See, you're distracting me. I walk out, the final echo of a groan slipping through my door before I close it. They scored again. I lean up against my wall and stare at my curtains. I forgot to draw them this morning, and I can't see the light trying to push its way in, blocked but unsuccessfully contained by the weak cap of my curtains. I walk over and open them. It sounds like an air ambulance descending to lift him to safety, but opening his eyes, he sees the wheels of a skateboard stuttering along, dipping into thin gaps in the pavement. The police arrive to watch his watery eyes glitter like the ocean shining off a star. His closing statement, the suspect bleeding to death outside the open till late off license. Police seal off the road as the shopkeeper walks back into the light of his livelihood, shaking his head like he can tolerate only a few more deaths before he hands the shop over to his son. The son who now changes his clothes and wraps something in his t-shirt. A mother does the washing, remembering to turn certain clothes inside out because he hates the effect of fading. She separates the socks and tosses a biocapsule into the washing machine, usually powder into the appliance's pocket, but she's aware it sometimes leaves chalk-like stains on his tracksuits. She watches it spin for a while, then brushes a few fallen leaves with the inside of her foot, like passing them back to the trees. As she puts on her rubber gloves, mixing liquid with the warm water and begins scrubbing him. He's a newborn once more, looking up at the face who's twice kept him alive, bathing him clean, presentable when people come to visit. She's on her hands and knees She's on her hands and knees telling him about the latest drama in the family. He always listens, and that's all she needs, for her son to hear her voice and know he's still her baby. I spot her on the train. I look up and squint as she rolls her suitcase over my toes. Where was Auntie behind those glazed marbles? 70, I think, with dark rings around her eyes and warts peppering the skin beneath. Everlasting weeping, I say to myself. She sits down with an open mouth side, opposite me but one seat to the left. She's tired, but instead of leaning back, she's resting her forearms on the top of her case, looking around curiously, but missing me, her eyes slipping over my dark skin. I'll get off her stop. Take my time behind because I know she'll take hers. Sentimental about every second. A walk every seasoned West African aunt seems to have. Almost limping, one foot in a grave no one is willing to dig. She hums my own son, she's hopeful. Taking slow strides into what must be a Sunday. I focus, give myself time to think. I'll move around to her right before I reach. Stop her going anywhere like footsteps in her sleep. The angle paying respect to cultural customs. We stop at the stairs, and I step up and gently place my right hand on the handle of her suitcase. Let me help you, Auntie, I say. Thank you, son, she says. I carry her luggage and stand with her on the escalators, watching her rest. Ma, you're doing your best. I leave her at the barrier, turn back with my own luggage, and continue on my way home. Thank you. Thank you.
Interesting. Misha and I were talking about mothers and sons and the fears that mothers have for their sons living in cities. So it's quite interesting hearing that. The next person I'd like to call up to read to us is TJ Jin, and she's also in the audience, but I can't see her. TJ has got a new book coming out, her first book, I believe, her debut. Congratulations, called Keeping the House. And I'm very excited because she also writes about North London and the different communities. And it's so great to be supporting a young writer at New Beacon, which is our tradition, as well as always respecting those that have gone before. And she's also going to be sharing a poem called Empty Town by Yu Yo-Yo. So welcome.
I was worried about how I was going to get up onto this chair, to be honest. Is the mic all right? My name is Tija Jin, and I'm an interdisciplinary artist. It's an absolute honour to be here today in New Beacon Books. I think places like this are integral to the memory of an area, and I'm glad that we're able to celebrate that, and what an honour to be with yourselves today. So I'm going to start with this poem by Yu Yo-Yo. It's translated by Dave Haysom, and it's called Empty Town. Empty town. Carry loneliness on your shoulder from the navel upward void. Collapse the physiological necessity of drinking a glass of water. This, the total inundation of your torso's empty chamber. You're like a pier, wrapped in sounds of arrivals and departure. The people on TV violating one another, while you remain just intact and a little bored. The debauchees don't stop here. Retrocede under bodily impulse. Fewer and fewer people in the city gradually replaced by an expanse of water. So now, I'm going to read a sequence that reminded me of that poem a little bit when I was writing. This is Keeping the House. When the man on the screen walks, his shoes clip-clop. All these cars, and he finally picks one, gets in it, and starts to drive off. I don't think his car is his because police pop up and try to ram him out the car park. And in car parks like this, there are a lot of sneaky corners, so he knows a way out of these tight spaces. He drives off with the police behind him. Driver. Jemile isn't happy. She's played this one before. He didn't save her a file, but I get to play it for the first time. The controller gets passed straight to me. How do I get the car out? We play until I start to get real sleepy. Red eyes. Mehmet Abi comes in later. Real sleepy. Red eyes. We can go soon. The time was starting to put a pin in. You need to know when things are going to be done, otherwise everything is mush. It's about 4 a.m. Sideways stepping past us, Mehmet Abi leans forward over his bedside table, tapping, and his shirt rises up to show a mat of hair on his lower back. I look at his boxers, which are blue with a red border, and cannot stop wanting to yank them down. It's not that I want to look at his bum. I want to hit it with something. It feels as though he's leaning forward for me. I have to hold on to the arm of the couch so hard. It feels like a dog's paw, which is the only thing that gets me to stop thinking about his boxes, the pullable, grabbable material. Zadie used to have a dog until it got put down for being the wrong breed. It was a nice dog, and we used to have a connection. Keys clink, and the PlayStation goes off. When we come out of his bedroom, Agatha is waiting to walk us home, but we refuse because we want to go in the car, and our mums didn't say we could walk with her. Better to walk alone. Jamila reminds Mehmet Abi that her dad wanted to talk to him anyway, and the thought of Ufuk Abi gets him agreeing to take us on the 10-minute car ride home. If life was a computer game, this moment would be where the screen freezes, and then the glitch ends as the car you were driving suddenly has 4 police cars hovering on top of it as it slides into a pixelated tree. The entrance to Mehmet Abi's flat has a double door for security, first the iron gate and then the normal wood one. Outside, an Englishman is screaming that they're about to come in if we don't open the door fast, but instead of opening the door, Mehmet Abi is running past us to get back into the bedroom. They give 5 seconds. We hear a soaring through the iron gate. Whatever's soaring through the gate door is quick at its job, and I can feel it in the air when it finally cuts through, enough for them to step through to the next part. From the bedside table, Mehmet Abi's grabbed something. Across the corridor is the bathroom, and we follow him as he runs to the toilet and tips powder into it. And after tipping, he tries to flush. But the flush in this old flat has always been a problem. Flush, which is why the toilet paper from when I did a number 1 is still there. It's a pillow to the powder, gently holding it up so it looks fresh except for the bits of water in it. Flush, flush. It's as though the whole house is groaning with us, trying to get the powder down. The pipes aren't having it until eventually they do, about 1 minute before the saw coming through the iron gate. As if a bomb's gone off, the wood door comes right off and Agatha's screaming, louder than I ever thought she could go. "It's all right, we'll replace the door, miss." Down the stairs are lots of men with guns, and they come in, barging Mehmet Abi as he climbs out of the bathroom with his hands up. Jamila winks at me as she puts something in her pocket, and it's probably that she's seen this big amount of men with guns already. There's no clash in the flat that he can't explain. Evidence gets taken till 10:30 a.m. Cuffs come out for Mehmet Abi. They find money that Mehmet Abi says is from selling shearling jackets, and he shows the leftover jackets in his cupboards. When they eventually take him off without much fuss, Agatha promises us that it's no big deal, he's come through worse. They've been tabbing the area for a while now, and all sorts of strangers got photoed coming in and out of Mehmet Abi's house, but that's all they have. Apparently, this is Operation Haddock, and the entire area has been getting swept all day. The only major find of the day is a long-reach machete. The plumbing in Tottenham is slow, but it does its job. Every toilet in this part of town must be rich. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tijay. I felt really transported, actually, to that, and the pace, the changes in pace were so interesting, as well as having a bit of a taste of a community, a Turkish community, which is really interesting to hear about. Thank you so much. Irfan Master is going to be up next. He's going to be reading a short story called Inner State, and it is part of an anthology called Resist. Welcome, Irfan.
Hi guys, such an honour to be here. When I was asked to contribute something, I thought about the themes of resistance, and straight away a story I wrote for Comma Press in an anthology called Resist, aptly, and it was really interesting because it talked about how we gather, where we're allowed to gather. Especially as a young man growing up in Leicester in the 80s in Thatcher's Britain, and when there was violence on the streets. The National Front would spit on you on the top deck of the bus. Police would arrest you with impunity and humiliate you all the time. And so when the call went out to pick, and the idea of this anthology was to pick a moment of resistance or protest in history. So there was different ones like Cable Street, Peterloo, Grenfell's there, Tottenham riots. There was one that stuck out straight away to me that was in Southall in 1979, and that was the death of Blair Peach. As soon as I saw it, I took that on and immediately regretted it because I felt a huge weight of responsibility because Blair Peach was a Kiwi man from East London. He was a teacher who went to a protest in Southall in 1979, and he was killed by the police. Now, it's a pretty significant moment in history in terms of the anti-fascist movement, but also significant in that that community in Southall had had enough on that day. And like I said, growing up in Leicester, I'd seen it up close. I'd had family members arrested for looking in a shop and things like that. I'd been put up against a wall and told to strip because they thought we had weapons and things like that. So the constant sort of harassment under the sus law, which I had to put up with, meant that I really wanted to write a story. But I was enthralled to feeling that I needed to bear testimony for Blair, because he had no justice, because he was killed, and then the police did their best to more or less say it wasn't really us, we didn't do it, it was a cover-up, etc., etc. The usual thing. So I wrote this story as testimony and witness in a way, and it took me a long time. And the editor, Ra, who won't thank me for saying this, but let's just say it was midnight before it went to print, before he got that story, because I was working on it right till the end. I'll read it and then I'll guide you through it, because I'm not going to read the whole story because it'll be a bit too long, I think. Inner State, dawn. The street lamps in Southall flicker, then flash, then die as dawn unravels, solemn, silent. And silence makes the most of this moment, stretching its arms, enveloping the streets, and for the briefest of moments, Southall is safe. A catch of breath before the first pan is scraped on the stove, the first eggs cracked, the first cry of a hungry child, the first embrace of husband and wife, the first song heard on the radio. Tired streets, old roads, weary avenues, waking to lorries lumbering slow on Dominion Road, to 1,000 voices speaking in tongues foreign and fantastic. A sudden crash, milk bottles, scuttles the silence away. The broken glass, the spilt milk, the shock of sound brings a violence to the day that is unexpected. The light, when it comes, is mottled and reluctant to offer its true nature. A woman, sari-bound, shuffles across the pavement, stopping at each shop front to whisper a prayer of protection, willing the glass to hold. The unwilling light follows in her wake, painting its own picture, settling on roofs. A safe distance from what is to come, in a low-ceiling factory, a man flicks on a switch and a loom kicks up. The shuttle relaying too quickly until the threads snap. The man swears, shutting the loom down, and starts the long process of removing broken threads. And here we come to rest, a woman with tired eyes, gently guiding her son along the street, coaxing him to keep up, whispering to him to be careful in the world of light and silence has created. As dawn hastily leaves to settle on some other place less heavy with portent, the people wake, unaware of the battle between light and dark, sound and silence. Southall wakes. So the story moves on, and it doesn't focus on Blair as such. It focuses on a character, a young boy called Manjeet. Manjeet wears a turban, and he's been told to stay away from the protest because it's going to be violent and it's going to kick off. Because the police have decided that they're going to let a small group of National Front members, about 50, gather in the town hall. And so the community has had enough. There's been many incidents beforehand leading up to this moment, and the local youth have had enough, and it's going to get a little bit more hostile than usual because the National Front can gather anywhere, but it's a provocation. And so in that moment, Manjeet is walking and he's getting closer and closer to the sort of the front line or where it's about to kick off. And there's 3,000 police in Southall. There's dogs, there's horses, and they've got koshes. And there's a group called SPG, called the Special Patrol Group. Now, if you ever saw this group, you'd see them that they were wearing heavy gear. They always had weapons that was sort of very, very, very evil looking, a bit medieval, and not official issue. And they always aimed for your head to do as much damage as possible. So Manjeet's at the sort of front line. Some of the elders were stepping back from the front line. Something in the way they moved suggested they had seen this before. Their old bones remembered. Some others held up their arms, placating, trying to reason with the officers in charge. Manjeet couldn't read lips, but he could read two opposing views. He could read the anger in the crowd, as those elders still at the front pleaded with the officers to call the meeting off. And he could read the stubbornness, the set of jaw of the officer in charge. Manjeet's ears began to close off the world around him and only pick up the sound of his own heart. A fist thumping against his chest from the inside. He looked across at the lines of young Asian men and saw fury. This would not stand, their clenched fists said. Even the elders who were trying to mediate shook their heads, resigned, knowing that this community had reached its limit. Manjeet saw the crowd ripple, as if a long fuse had been lit from a distance, and behind the police, in the space they had created around the entrance to the town, a small handful of men and women appeared. They raised their fists at the crowd, smiling in their direction. A couple lifting their arms in short, sharp motions, aping the Nazi salute. This was it. This small gathering. Less than 100. Manjeet noted smug faces, swaggering, self-assured and totally safe. They looked so ordinary. On the walk here, Manjeet had made monsters of these men. Contorted faces, tall as trees, wild eyes, barbed skin, clawed hands, but these were men he saw on the streets every day. Ordinary, men he saw driving buses, selling fruit, councilmen, teachers at his school, police. And this, more than anything, filled Manjeet with fear. Monsters he could spot a mile off and avoid, but ordinary people, living alongside him, walking down the streets, going about their lives, and all the while, this was inside them. This rage and anger towards him, his family, his people. Manjeet stopped back from the fray. The realization filled him with so much panic it made him stagger. As the members of the National Front walked into the town hall, he felt a wave of frustration crush towards the front line, exploding against the shield wall. The police lines broke and charged the protesters where they stood. Batons and shields raised. The blue bloc surged against that massed crowd, and Manjeet heard the sharp clap of hooves on concrete, and out of the confusion and mass of bodies trying to get away, horses charged, and on them men with heavy truncheons. For the moment, Manjeet stood and observed the chaos objectively. He was not really there. None of them were. Manjeet didn't move an inch. Like a pebble on the ocean bed, he felt the force of water sweep over him. Through a break in the crowd, he glimpsed a woman, dressed in a white shalwar-kameez, sitting on the floor, refusing to move. An older boy hurtled past him and grabbed Manjeet by the collar, dragging him along. He was propelled from his reverie into a sprint, heading for an alleyway, and Manjeet looked back for the woman in white, but she was gone. The spill from the town hall went in all directions, police horses charging to clear a path, followed by hundreds of officers, hitting, grabbing and wrestling men. As the second wave of police charged, the violence reached into the back streets, and this time Manjeet knew not to stand still. In these quieter streets, the atmosphere was different. Manjeet could taste blood in his mouth. He'd bitten his tongue as he'd leapt the fence, and a bitter taste swirled around his mouth. From behind the fence, he heard rushing feet and a shout, and looking through a gap, he saw a man stumble to the ground and a police officer standing over him. Only he wasn't dressed like a normal officer, with the usual dark blue uniform. He was tall, wearing heavy boots, a padded jacket, and he didn't move like the others either. The fallen man held up his hands and stayed kneeling, and grabbing the man by his shirt, the plainclothes officer punched him repeatedly in the head, and when he buckled, kicked him in the stomach, continuing to kick him until the man stopped moving. Manjeet stopped breathing. He shifted his weight, snapping a twig underfoot, and saw the helmeted head turn. Crawling back away from the fence, Manjeet clambered up on the wall and broke into a sprint. People were running down the street ahead of him, but it felt as if the numbers were dwindling, so he slowed his pace, the carrier bag still in his hand, and he took a right onto Beechcroft Avenue, where it felt like people had chosen to take refuge. Manjeet scanned the street, a row of blocky terraced houses on either side, and saw mostly strangers. It was an ordinary street where most days nothing much happened. He took in the faces and walked past a small group sitting on the curb. They were talking amongst themselves. One of them, a tall man, noticed Manjeet's inquiring eyes and smiled at him, but the smile stopped short of reaching up to his eyes. Heavy boots thundering into the quiet street broke the eye contact, and he felt them before he saw them. An icy hand on his shoulder. Manjeet didn't even turn to look, he just ran, his long strides taking him further down the street. Don't look back. Don't look back. Turning a corner at speed, he crashed into what felt like a brick wall, and he landed hard on his knees and struggled to get up. A police officer stood calmly in front of him, face covered, wearing a padded jacket. It was what rested in his hand that really caught Manjeet's attention. He'd seen a lot of the police officers wielding standard issue koshes before, but this looked different. It was thicker, longer, heavier, like a pipe. The heavy-set police officer was also different. There was no anger in his eyes, just a brutal reckoning. A familiarity with the weapon in his hand and his right to wield it. As he saw the weapon swing towards him, Manjeet held up his hands weakly in surrender. The thick lead pipe swung and caught Manjeet across the top of his skull. He was already ducking when it made contact, but sensed the blow knock him to the ground. He felt his turban slip off his head and unravel as he fell, the dark saffron unfurling and spooling around the officer's feet. The carrier bag he'd been lugging around all day left his grasp and split, sending its contents across the dull grey slabs of the pavement. Reaching up to touch his skull, Manjeet accepted a bloody mess, but there was nothing. The turban had taken the brunt of the swing. Deflated, scared, helpless, Manjeet dropped to his knees, his long black hair unravelling in a slow pirouette that transfixed the officer. On the floor between the officer and Manjeet, hundreds of brown grains of rice were scattered, falling into the gutter, crunching under the officer's feet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irfan. Once again, transported to the racism of the 70s and 80s there. And I think it's really important in terms of linking your work there with the tradition of New Beacon, once again, in terms of the collaboration and the solidarity across oppressed peoples. And I know that John LaRose and certainly Gus, who's here this evening, Gus John, who did a lot of work with the late Ian MacDonald in terms of raising awareness of how the Asian community were also in the sort of butt end of racism from the police and the state. And also they did a lot to try to build those links, because oppressed people are so often subjected to this kind of very sophisticated approach of divide and rule, and I think we still are. And I think it's really important that we make sure those stories of the past and of now very much connect us rather than divide us. And I'm sure Samaya will relate to that in terms of South Africa, where the apartheid state definitely did its best to make sure the oppressed people were not going to be working together. I also think it's really interesting, the title, Resist, is a very powerful way to just bring it all together. It's not victimhood, it's actually standing up. So thank you so much for that. Now it is Courtney and Newlands going to come up, please. And interesting again is going to be the link about what makes a place. This is a short story called The Gold That Built the City. And it's quite interesting if you think about where these minerals come from and who they benefit. So I think that should be interesting Welcome, Courtier. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I'm really honoured and happy to be here in this very historical gathering place. A place where I just feel the energy of it. A place where so much has happened, and I'd love to, be able to soak up some of the conversations that must have happened, some of the events that must have happened in these wars. I'm just really honoured to be here. I've taught workshops here, but I've actually never done a reading in this space, so this is really lovely for me to be in this space and have and do this reading. Also, to be gathered with some of my favourite writers as well. It's really nice, and to hear them and just be able to take in what they're writing as well. It's very, it's just very deep for me, and I'm just really excited to be amongst you guys. And gathering also has a slightly different meaning these days, right? Given the fact that we're, wearing masks. I was wearing my mask here, and we don't get to gather as much now. It takes on a certain significance these days. So, there's a lot to think about. I think in what Irfan didn't say about that story, I just really wanted to quickly mention this before I got started, is that in that collection, Resist, and also in Protest, the anthology that came before it, we were actually paired up with academics or experts in each particular subject that we were writing about. So it was just it's a really interesting way of working, and I've done it with Ra Page at Comma Press twice now, and it's just a really fun way to work, because basically someone's doing all your research, man. They come to you and they're just like, okay, so here's what you don't know, and they just tell you all this stuff, and then you can go away and you can put it together how you want. So I just wanted to draw attention to that, because it's a really interesting way of working. This story that I'm going to read came out of my collaboration with the Serpentine and with Samaya, and it was just a response to the build that went on, that was designed and in part constructed by Samaya. And I just was I spent a lot of time looking at interviews and doing my research this time, and just trying to find a way to put into words what you had done with the materials that you had, and the vision in your head. So I came up with this, The Gold That Built the City. It's quite abstract, and it's very short. So if I've got time, I don't know if I will have time, I might read a little bit from my novel as well. I haven't read this before, actually, as well. So this is the first time anyone's heard this. Which it means more for me than for you guys, just because I'm a bit nervous because I've never read it before. So anyway, The Gold That Built the City. He goes in search of space, in search of landscape, environment, of being. A quest of minimal proportions he wanders first, that thought soon going abandoned. Too judgmental, too something that can't be grasped or named, only it feels empty with loss rather than swelling with ripe potential. Better cast aside, orphaned, left in the dust behind his feet, receding. This was an urge, and the urge comes from a place of respect. Therefore, it has to be respected. Why not? No reason at all, he hums, moving along, thinking 2 meters apart, always failing, jostling and bumping, body shifting sideways to find some tiny gap between people, annoyed and trying to stop. Not helpful. Not helpful at all. He can hear his own breath in the face mask he loathes but made himself wear, a halting, uneven rasp, and below that, the mechanical noise of footfall. A nice rhythm, it has to be said. No reason at all, swirling circular motion in his mind, repeating, until gone without notice. Hours later, unbidden, the random memory returns. Go where? Do what? No answer except that urgent need to be in some space, any really, to be around people, even while he fears them, to see and hear, even if he can't touch, perhaps smell? Yes, possibly. To know he is real. Could that be it? Are we sure we are if we do not see the reflection of ourselves in others? Are we sure we mark the world if we are sole witness? No answer, or perhaps that's wrong. Perhaps the answer is in the urge, the need to shower and brush and dress, to gather keys and phone and leave, just go. Vacate one space in search of another, or many. He doesn't know. And the outside is vast. Just to look up and see is almost enough. To look up and crane his head, the skin of his skull concertinaed against his neck, to let his jaw fall slack, to gape. He could almost go back, go home. Today was prophesied warm, 16 degrees, but the sky says otherwise. Large patches of blue obscured by clouds thick and grey as old men's beards, also shifting and moving, never at rest. Like him. He can almost see bulging rain. It's dizzying looking up, also dangerous. People aren't happy with his trajectory, even if he stops dead, immovable. After a while, it's time to walk on, find elsewhere. So the first stop is the park, even if that's unsatisfying. How does one space manage forlorn beauty so effortlessly, to be inviting and so immediately unsettling? There are huge overarching trees and cherry blossoms, watercolour pink, a lone cat slinking between metal railings, barely a glance behind her. There is the bone-dry paddling pool that will be filled come summer, faded blue and marked with dents, cracks and chips, the stern brick building where local young men hang, and everyone avoids. The homeless cocooned in sleeping bags like caterpillars that will never become butterflies, the glinting silver of nitrous oxide bottles in lush grass. This park has history, good and bad, and so is unsuitable. Yet for the moment, it does something for him. He is the butterfly airing wings on a blade of grass in wait of the moment. It is the intermission before flight, not a destination, but as it is contributory, this is also respected. He thinks and decides, knows where. With that, he's off, thinking of movements great and small, thinking of twinkling metal and grass, thinking of gold. Does this restlessness begin with him, or was it passed on? Does it belong to his people alone or owned by everyone? So many questions. He knows the answer this time. On the tube, nodding at each other with carriage sway, trying not to look. Books, bags, and earbuds. He has no such distraction and stares at his feet. His shoes are worn trainers bought by his grandson ages ago, good to walk in, he was told, an unseen air bubble giving him bounce. He calls it unnecessary, though they are comfortable. Think of it as suspension, his grandson said, and he immediately thought of his own body hanging mid-air without assistance, caught in polluted atmosphere, like amber. The image so compelling it took him from reality, from the moment. He stayed there a while. Is that what happened to him? To them? Perhaps yes. The carriage rattles everyone in their separate seated compartments, and a whine of metal on metal grows louder, piercing his ears, making him wince. He alights when needed, and then it's up and up like a Mr. Man, walking, standing still while moving diagonally towards the surface, walking again until he's out. Mask off, breathing sour air deep into his lungs, although he doesn't mind. There's a freshness here that's difficult to put a finger on, that he wished he could transcribe onto canvas, that eluded him ever since he came to this part of the city. A young man in search of a dream. Somewhat cold and crisp, still grey comes to mind again. Almost wispy though, light as crystallized vapour, and the air is bright. Roads are wider, skin tones paler. Wasn't always this way. Striding past opulence and hotels, bunched tourists and oligarch houses, eateries and the reluctant gleam of antique stores, by shops that give no inkling of what they sell, never have, Veering to one side, turn sideways, maintaining distance even when they do not. Ever alert. Following the sloping incline of the hill, outpouring energy, pulling urge. Why today? Still, he does not know. He feels strong, feels great, his overused muscles warm now. Oldies but goodies. He sweats. That's probably a good sign. Past Orwell's blue plaque, which makes him smile each time, that's nice. Going on like running water, downwards past an old friend's house that had once been a pub, became a block of one-room flats, became his friend's home. Outside the building and upward, there it was, a trace of outline that was once the pub sign, and if you look more carefully, ghostly doors and windows, a dark stain of an old cellar marking the pavement. Unbidden tears rise from nowhere. Gulped back, salt in his inner throat. Silly old fool. A year without coming back is a long time. Many years without living here. Ridiculous. He'd sought escape in those days, an urge similar to the one that brought him to this country in the first instance. Imagined he could turn his shoulders and hunch his back twice over, but something happened in this locality that became simple replication, a minor loss compared with the major one before it. Things had happened. Times had happened. Tings and times, he tells himself, smiling at his feet. Yes, the cliche was true. Someone once said the streets were paved with gold and the thought became an ongoing echo. These people, the ones who call themselves indigenous but are not, always make out he and his people believe their own myths, inasmuch as they think that they are true representations of mortal life as it's lived. The people of this land who also arrived from elsewhere, only centuries before, don't realize that mythical life and mortal life are mere mirrors, one continuously reflecting the other. Which is the metaphor? It's something he's never been quite able to tell. Never mind, not important. The truth is, in actual fact, in spite of everything, they are the gold. He's never realized it until this day, this very moment. But it is. Knowledge glistening inside him. And when he comes to the lower end of the hill, finding it more or less as it had been, that minuscule green space, the tiny playground, a ball court, a former evangelical church turned community gathering place, he sits on the nearest bench, exhaling, closes his eyes to see people in their thousands, smell the pepper drift, the barbecue smoke, hear pans ring, a multitude of voices joined in song. Normally, he'd scrabble through his customary pencil and sketch pad, eager to trace the moment onto white paper. Now, he only wants to savor their lives. Chin lifted upwards, he fills his lungs. He might stay a while. Thank you. I think I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That image of the caterpillars that will never become butterflies is that's going around in my head. Thank you. Our final contributor this evening is Gus John. Don't know where to begin in introducing Gus. He's done so many things, and he's been part of the New Beacon family from the start, really. And he was very good friends with John LaRose and the whole of the community, Margaret, and is somebody that's worked in so many different fields, youth work, education in all its different areas, and as an activist and writer, and somebody who is constantly writing and campaigning and speaking up for people whose voices are not being listened to, and is always gives good counsel and is very, I think, very determined. He really lives by his maxim that he has at the end of his emails. You should do right and fear no one. So, you know, we are very, very pleased that he's here tonight to join us, and he is going to be reading from a section from Nursing the Nation. Welcome, Gus.
Thank you, Nadia. Hello, friends. I have been associated with New Beacon and with John LaRose, Sarah White since 1966. I was a trifle younger then. And we've done a whole lot of things together. I mean, I witnessed and supported the growth of New Beacon Books. Was around when we moved from the house at 2 Albert Road to this space, and later joined with others, including Margaret, to establish the International Book Fair of Radical Black and Third World Books in 1982. And growing out of that in 1991, we founded the George Padmore Institute, which is located above here. The purpose of the Institute was really to memorialize, understand, analyze, package the experiences of Black political theorists, activists, anti-colonialists, freedom fighters from the Caribbean, the continent of Africa, from the Indian subcontinent, pretty much from about the turn of the 20th century. In 1978, I started an offshoot of New Beacon, not as a publisher, but as a book supplier in Manchester, where I was also the chair of the Black Parents Movement, an offshoot of the one we started here in this space. And I decided to call it Education for Liberation Books. And in that capacity, continued as a member of one of the organizing members of the International Book Fair, Radical Black and Third World Books. Margaret and I do all sorts of things with our lives. And one of the things we do in common is to be trustees of an organization called the Nubian Jack Community Trust. It's an organization, as some of you will know, that erects blue plaques around the place in memory of people who've done significant things in their lives and in the struggle for racial equality and social justice, against oppression, against state racism in this society. The latest project of the Nubian Jack Community Trust was this anthology, Nursing a Nation, an anthology of African and Caribbean contributions to Britain's health services, is part of a two-part project. There is this publication, which was launched a couple of weeks ago, the same day as a monument was erected outside of Whittington Hospital in Archway. Again, a monument to those people who nursed Britain, particularly in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War. I am a patron of that organization and one of the trustees, as is Margaret. We both collaborated on this exercise. And I was asked to write a foreword because I kicked up a stink about certain approaches that this was taking, which I thought were not going to be particularly helpful as we look at the history of those people who contributed to Britain's health services from the African diaspora. And my main concern really was that there was a huge emphasis on Windrush and effectively seeing everything, everybody, and their contribution through the prism of Windrush and that whole Windrush narrative. And so in the foreword, what I aimed to do was to put that in a somewhat more accurate historical perspective and remind the nation and we ourselves as the African diaspora that before 1948, there were some pioneers, some real trailblazers from Africa and the Caribbean who were administering to London, Britain, particularly working class communities, and who, for example, like Dr. John Alcindor from Trinidad, did some work which was pretty pivotal to the shaping of the Beveridge Report, which gave rise to the birth of the National Health Service. So this is really part of the foreword. This book is a massive addition to the available literature on the contribution of the African diaspora to medical practice and the provision of health services in Britain, and it fills a huge gap in British historians' recording of that contribution. It is a book about continuities, and not least the continuity across generations of the African experience of Britain as a colonial power steeped in racism, with an enduring culture of anti-Blackness that for centuries has resisted all attempts on the part of African people to humanize the society and assist it in displacing that culture. The strength and importance of the book is the evidence it provides of African health practitioners, community physicians, hospital clinicians, and nursing staff, and the various modes of delivery of health services, as well as the influence in shaping policy on healthcare and on medical research, inventions, and practice throughout the 20th century and even long before. For example, the history of the life and work of medical doctors James Risen Russell, John Alcindor, Harold Moody, James Brown, Cecil Clarke, and George Busby, Margaret's father, all Black Caribbean and all born before 1900, is little known even among the African diaspora in Britain, let alone among the white population. 30 plus years of Black History Month programs, even in the boroughs in which those doctors lived and practiced, have not resulted in them being better known as pioneers not just of medical practice, typically among working class communities characterized by poverty and social deprivation, but of struggles for social justice and against racism and colonialism. They distinguish themselves in their efforts to ensure that poor whites were not denied quality health care because of their inability to pay, while themselves suffering the worst forms of racial injustice, especially from the state. There is a continuity, too, between their struggles to end colonial rule in the Caribbean territories from which they had come and in Africa, as well as the demands that the British state confront racism in government and in the nation as a whole as part of the legacy of empire. For the most part, they had won scholarships which entitled them to study at a prestigious university in Britain, and Edinburgh was a university of choice, especially for those wishing to study medicine. But positioned in Britain as they were, they embraced the responsibility to mobilize support among students from Africa and among the British population against the savagery of the plantation system and for an end to colonial rule. Those demands were articulated even more forcefully in resolutions passed at the 5th Pan-African Congress in Manchester in 1945, 3 years before the so-called Windrush boat docked in Tilbury Docks. The stories of those doctors and of the nurses of the African diaspora in that period, whose work is also little known, remind us that there was health provision in Britain prior to the birth of the NHS in 1948, and that Black health practitioners helped lay the foundations for the establishment of the NHS. The preoccupation with the Windrush is therefore a historical distortion, and a particularly disturbing one, in that it represents a discontinuity between that important period of the Black presence in Britain and the arrival of that ship in 1948, despite the number of descendants of earlier human cargo that it brought and whose forebears had been transported to the Caribbean under far more barbaric conditions. The one fact that the government, the media, and those who are so keen on celebrating Windrush seldom mention, and would prefer if we all forget, is that amongst the 500 people who arrived on the Windrush were ex-service personnel who had served in the Second World War and on demobilization had returned to the colonies to a life of penury, many having had to place themselves at the mercy of their own communities, especially if they were still overcoming physical injuries and mental trauma. The other inconvenient truth they would have us forget is that prior to the Windrush, and for the same reasons, on the 21st of December 1947, 6 months before the Windrush docked, some 200 ex-service personnel had arrived in Southampton from the Caribbean aboard the steamship Almanzora. No one hears about them and about the way Britain abandoned them to their fate once they returned to the Caribbean after demob, thus necessitating the return to this country in search of bread and opportunity to rebuild their lives. It is a further distortion of history to suggest that the so-called Windrush generation made a greater contribution to the making of modern Britain and to building the NHS than any other body of Commonwealth immigrants. The 32 London boroughs and inner city areas of cities such as Bristol, Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, and Sheffield are not the entirety of multicultural Britain. And even if we from the former British colonies of the Caribbean did make a massive contribution to rebuilding post-war Britain through our work in the National Health Service, transport, and manufacturing, we have been virtually absent from the economic and financial sectors of the society, except as consumers, unlike other former British citizens who came to Britain in even larger numbers than on the Windrush, and 20 and 25 years after the Windrush. British imperialism and colonialism were not limited to the West Indies. The legacy of empire is what accounts for the Kenyan Asian crisis in 1968 and the Ugandan Asian crisis in 1972, and the presence of sizable communities of South Asians in cities and towns across Britain. And that is even before we take into account Commonwealth citizens in Britain as health practitioners, industrialists, traders, and economic migrants from the Indian subcontinent and from China and Hong Kong. Common to the experience of people from the Indian subcontinent and from Southeast Asia, as from the Caribbean, is endemic racism in its structural, cultural, institutional, and personal manifestations. 75 years after the Second World War, that racism continues to be part of the experience of nurses and other health practitioners of the African and Asian diaspora. Among them are people with far more experience, qualifications, and competence than those who managed them. Yet, senior leadership teams remain stubbornly white, insecure in dealing with matters of race, and therefore more likely to sustain a working environment and a management culture that discriminates against African and global majority people, both by commission and by omission. Not only do the testimonies of many of the contributors to this volume attest to that fact, so does the statement in the book from the Royal College of Nursing, which is by any measure a further indictment of the NHS in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gus, for that. One of many subjects that he's committed to changing the narrative on. And we were talking about how the communities have been, on the one hand, things haven't changed and people are still being treated so badly in the arms of the state, and the likes of Cameron's family are still benefiting from the slave trade. And yet there's a kind of patronising kind of, oh, well, these people came over and they were nurses and they worked as conductors on our buses, and somehow that's just about okay, but we do also deport them when we don't want them anymore. So thank you for that. I think that kind of wraps it up for this evening. We're really pleased that you all were here and were able to hear some of these stories and share in New Beacon. We are going to be selling some of the books, and we hope that you will continue to spread the word about New Beacon. And please visit the pavilion at the Serpentine. It's really worth seeing, and hopefully all the other bits like ours here. It's a little journey of discovery around London. Thank you very much for coming.